Yesterday, he spoke to his foreign policy, and Ed Henry mentioned his critics. President Obama took issue. And the good thing is, the president didn't get petty or defensive or knee-jerk and blame Fox News or something like that. That's what I like. I like a leader who takes responsibility and doesn't use straw man arguments. Ladies and gentlemen, our president, President Barack Obama. Roll it.
And how you answer those critics who say they think the doctrine is weakness.
Well, Ed, I doubt that I'm going to have time to lay out my entire foreign policy doctrine. There are actually some complimentary pieces as well about my foreign policy, but I'm not sure you ran them. Here's I think the general takeaway from this trip. Our alliances in the Asia-Pacific have never been stronger. And if you look at the results of what we've done over the last 5 years, it is fair to say that our alliances are stronger, our partnerships are stronger, and in the Asia-Pacific region, just to take one example, we are much better positioned to work with the peoples here on a whole range of issues of mutual interest. And that may not always be sexy. That may not always attract a lot of attention, and it doesn't make for good argument on Sunday morning shows. But it avoids errors. You hit singles, you hit doubles. Every once in a while, we may be able to hit a home run, but we steadily advance the interests of the American people and our partnership with folks around the world.
Our guest is Dr. James S. Robbins. He's a commentary writer for USA Today and a senior fellow at National Security Affairs on the American Foreign Policy Council. He's an award-winning senior editorial writer for foreign affairs at the Washington Times and also an author. He has served as special assistant to the Office of Secretary of Defense, and his books include his latest, Native Americans, Patriotism, Exceptionalism, and the New American Identity, as well as This Time We Win, Revisiting the Tet Offensive. James, Doctor, I go to you because, well, there's a number of reasons. We got some Benghazi news, too, and I want to get to that in a second. You've been outstanding in your coverage of that and asking all the right questions, and seemingly what we've discovered in emails is something you've talked about in the past. But I digress. Let's get to this first. This is President Obama speaking to his critics regarding foreign policy. You just heard the original response. Now, I took a montage because we've got a lot to say in a little time, and what I did was I took the first half of his answer, part of his answer, and I gave his conclusion, which actually wrapped up very nicely. Doesn't change the meaning of what he said. He says our alliances are stronger, and there are people complimenting his foreign policy. We also have this of what he said yesterday, a direct response to his critics. And there seems to be a theme here. Think invade, military force, or do nothing. Roll it.
Typically, criticism of our foreign policy has been directed at the failure to use military force. And the question I think I would have is, why is it that everybody's so eager to use military force after we've just gone through a decade of war at enormous costs to our troops and to our budget? And what is it exactly that these critics think would have been accomplished? My job as Commander-in-Chief is to deploy military force as a last resort and to deploy it wisely. And frankly, most of the foreign policy commentators that have questioned our policies would go headlong into a bunch of military adventures that the American people have no interest in participating in and would not advance our core security interests.
Jim, I've been a critic, so he may be talking about me. I'll accept that. That's fine. But I think he's also talking about you. What do you have to say to the president?
Wow, it's hard to respond to all that. But basically, it falls into two categories of problems with those kind of answers that he gives. The first, and regarding the first clip, is he says things like, our alliances are stronger, we're moving forward, and so forth. And this just isn't true. Our alliances are not stronger. We are not moving forward. The countries of the world think less of us now than they did when he took office. Our friends are uncertain about us. Our enemies don't fear us. There are more people being killed by terrorists today than when he took office. I mean, just go down the list. I don't know where the steady improvement is that he's talking about. It's certainly not in Eastern Europe. It's certainly not in the Middle East, whether that's Syria or the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I really don't know what he's talking about. So that's issue number one. The second one is this false dichotomy that he likes to bring up to sort of rationalize his failure, where he says, well, my critics just want to invade everywhere. Like the use of military force, in his mind, it's like invading someplace or starting a war. And not understanding that military force has many different uses at various levels of force. It could just be threatening force. It could be, using military power to dissuade actions of enemies. It doesn't need to be going in and conquering someplace. But unfortunately, you can't do those things credibly if all you're doing is, number one, condemning the use of force, and number two, building down our forces to the point where people just aren't going to be scared by us anymore. So if he really believes that the use of military power is either invade or do nothing, then he really doesn't have a grasp of it. And as commander-in-chief, he should get some people around him who could advise him on other uses of force that don't involve invading or, standing by the sidelines doing nothing.
What about the issue of Iraq and the lessons he learns? I have another clip for you. I know it's long, but I want to give the president his due. We can't take out the hims and haws, but this really does identify what he is trying not to do. He referenced it in his conclusion of singles and doubles and not being that sexy. Again, great question. Where are the singles and where are the doubles? And what we see is strikeouts. That said, here's the president talking about foreign policy, the use of military force, and not making decisions on bravado. Roll it.
The point is that for some reason, many who were proponents of what I consider to be a disastrous decision to go into Iraq haven't really learned the lesson of the last decade. And they keep on just playing the same note over and over again. Why? I don't know. But my job as Commander-in-Chief is to look at what is it that is going to advance our security interests over the long term, to keep our military in reserve for where we absolutely need it. There are going to be times where there are disasters and difficulties and challenges all around the world, and not all of those are going to be immediately solvable by us. But we can continue to speak out clearly about what we believe. Where we can make a difference using all the tools we've got in the toolkit, we should do so. And if there are occasions where targeted, clear actions can be taken that would make a difference, then we should take them. We don't do them because somebody sitting in an office in Washington or New York think it would look strong. That's not how we make foreign policy. And if you look at the results of what we've done over the last 5 years, it is fair to say that our alliances are stronger, our partnerships are stronger.
Yeah, I had to keep that line in there. I know I repeated it in the first clip, but he's making the claim. Jim, is the reason you talk about even the mention of military forces to feel stronger? Is that what he's saying about people who are saying that? Like, to feel stronger? Is it like, what is it thinking that, hey, tough? Is that, I mean, surely you can't be thinking in that juvenile mentality. I mean, that's absurd.
Well, this is just the way that Obama, in every speech he gives or talk or whenever he answers a question, he's always belittling anyone who disagrees with him. And he finds ways to do that, to slip those in. And he does it all the time, constantly. This is why he's such a divisive character. He'll never give an inch to the opposition on anything. And he's always belittling people. So he said, oh, well, people make these decisions just to look strong. Well, I would put it to the president that, number one, it's important to be strong. And I don't know if we're as strong as we were. And number two, yes, to a certain degree, it's good to look strong. What are we supposed to do? Look weak? Look indecisive? Look like we're doing nothing? Because frequently that's how we do look. So we don't take action just to look strong. But there is something to be said for people being afraid of you. As Machiavelli said in one of the classics of international relations theory, you're either going to be, it's better to be feared than loved. And I think from the beginning, it was absolutely clear that Mr. Obama believed that it was his job to make the United States loved around the world, and that his personal charisma would lead to the world just loving us. And his personal charisma didn't translate everywhere in the world. And secondly, as Machiavelli said, that love was fickle. Maybe they loved us at first, but now they don't. And fear is durable. If they're afraid of you, they stay afraid. So, yeah, it's great if there are a couple countries out there now that think we're just the best. But you know what? Look at Russia. Look at China. Look at Iran. Look at North Korea. Look at countries that matter on the national security radar. They have absolutely no fear of Barack Obama whatsoever. They have no respect for him, and they're going to pursue their aims to our detriment, no matter what. And there's nothing he can do now to change that, because they took the gauge of him, and they know who he is. He's just a guy who wants everyone to love him. Not just wants it, but expects it. He just absolutely expects it based on his whole life of people just, loving him. Well, charisma's great, but it doesn't run a foreign policy or a national security strategy, and now we are finding that out.
Where is the outlining of what we stand for versus what they stand for? That can be a very big motivating force when you start pointing out the human rights abuses, the fact that we're redrawing borders first time since World War II. And I mean, that notion of doing that, I get the idea that that would be a pretty big deal. That you could say, this guy, okay, let's just clarify here. We support the Ukrainian people, and Putin's a killer. Putin's a guy who does this, this, and this, and he has a history, and we have a history of defending freedom. That's what we believe in. And he could have done that in Iran in 2009. He could have done that in, certainly he could have made the statement to North Korea numerous times. There have been opportunities. Oh, how about the defense of Israel and not forcing him to sign a deal with terrorists and blaming them and accusing them of having an apartheid state? I mean, Jim, there seems to be, he seems to be the bizarro Reagan. He's the exact opposite of what Ronald Reagan was, and we're going to get the exact opposite of what Reagan achieved.
Yeah, it's funny. He will talk about values and things like that, but then you have to wonder, after he talks about it, because you'll recall that when the Muslim Brotherhood had seized control of Egypt, and President Obama was talking about how this was a great reflection of our values, even as the Muslim Brotherhood was talking about all of the things they were going to do under Sharia law that had nothing to do with what I would call Western values of freedom and equality and women's rights and democracy and everything else. So he uses these platitudes, which, under Ronald Reagan actually had a resonance. But under Obama, you just say, what the heck are you talking about? Don't these words mean the same thing to you that they have to every other American president? And it's just strange because, and I think this is consistent with Obama's MO, they just say things to say them. You know, if you want your doctor, you can keep it, right? If you want your democracy, you can keep it. Egypt, I mean, they had to take it back.
Right.
And just let me say, as an aside, since you mentioned it, the thing about Israel being an apartheid state and John Kerry's ridiculous statement to that effect, you know, in the Palestinian Authority, they have absolutely stated that if they become a country, there will be no Jews allowed in the country at all, ever. That if you're a Jew, you have to get out. They have said that. I mean, in Israel, you can be Jewish, you can be a Palestinian, you know, you can be an Arab, you could worship as a Muslim, you can worship as a Christian, you can worship as nothing. You know, you could be a Buddhist, you could be an atheist, anything you want. In Israel, you can be it. In the Palestinian Authority, you better be a Palestinian Muslim, or else they're telling you to get out. So tell me which of those is an apartheid state. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well,
John Kerry should think a little bit.
Do you think, well, okay, so should he resign?
I don't think he should have gotten the post to begin with. But,
Right, well.
I mean, it's just such a ridiculous statement. I mean, the man should be giving nonstop apologies at the very least. But, you know, is it any worse than some of the other stuff we've heard from this administration? Heck, Hillary Clinton said similar things when she was Secretary of State. So, I mean, it just goes to show where they're coming from.
That it does. I mentioned first time since World War II, forcibly, I'll quote from the Washington Post, first forcible change of borders in Europe since World War II. Just to clear that up, got a little ahead of myself. Here's a question, Jim, regarding Benghazi and the latest news. Speaking of Hillary Clinton, with the latest revelations on the emails and the coaching of Rice by Ambassador Rice, alleged by the White House, a White House aide specifically.
Alleged nothing.
Well, the documents prove, yes,
it's
okay.
Proven.
Yeah, so what do you believe this goes all the way to President Obama, and do you believe there's a paper trail that this was all about the politics of what we assumed and blaming the video, that there is a paper trail and this we're getting more of it? And what does that mean, if so?
Yes, we have the paper trail. It goes to the deputy, White House deputy for strategic communications, Ben Rhodes, and they stated exactly in this email what we've been saying all along, that they were going to concoct a story about an internet video that caused this whole thing as a way of protecting the president and making him look better than he would have and making it not look like a failure of policy. The emails state that almost explicitly, word for word. I mean, they're remarkably frank. So I don't see how it could be any more clear that this was orchestrated out of the White House, and it was intended specifically to defend the president against attacks of the failed policy. And it doesn't say this explicitly, but we know, because it was right before the 2012 election, that was behind this, that they didn't want it to look bad for the election.
So how big a story, if this were a conservative president, had an R by his name, how big a news would this be? Would it grace the front page if we still had even online, of the newspapers that we would see? I mean, is this a huge story?
Yeah, it's huge. It would be Watergate. It would be Iran-Contra. I mean, you not only have Ben Rhodes in on this, but you have the Deputy Director, Mike Morrell, of the CIA. You have Hillary Clinton's Deputy Chief of Staff, Jake Sullivan, also mentioned in these emails as someone that they would work with. So you have the CIA, the White House, and the State Department deputies all getting together and concocting the story. So, come on. Does it get any worse? I mean,